Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on ISO 27001's Statement of Applicability, usually referred to as a SoA. I'm Camille, and with me is Mike, an experienced ISO lead auditor and security consultant. Hi Mike.
Thanks, Camille. Glad to be here.
Let's jump right in. First, a quick overview. Mike, can you briefly explain what the SoA is and why it matters?
Sure, the Statement of Applicability is the document that lists every Annex A control, indicates whether each is applicable or not applicable, and provides a rationale. It serves as the bridge between your risk assessment and your implemented controls and helps auditors and stakeholders understand why each control was chosen or excluded.
Thanks for that explanation, Mike. Now, moving into specifics. How should organizations determine which Annex A controls to include or exclude in the SoA?
The process is always risk-driven. You begin by defining your ISMS boundaries, whether enterprise-wide or focused on a particular business area, and inventory the assets and processes within that boundary. Next, you perform a risk assessment on those in-scope items, identifying threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts. For each Annex A control, you ask whether it addresses an identified risk. If it does, you implement it and note that in the SoA, and if it does not, you mark it not applicable with a concise explanation, showing that residual risk is acceptably low or mitigated by other measures. Every decision must tie back to documented risk assessment outputs or compensating controls.
Right. So even if something seems obviously out of scope, you still document the rationale.
That's right, Camille.
Next question. What language and style work best when justifying exclusions in the SoA?
Justifications should be concise and precise. State the control ID and name, explain why it doesn't apply to in-scope risks by referencing specific assessment findings, and mention any evidence or compensating measures with dates or document references. For example, Control A9 2.1, user registration marked not applicable, no self-service user registration exists for in-scope systems, all accounts are provisioned centrally under policy in ISX dated X, residual risk assessed as low. Avoid vague terms like not needed, since auditors value clarity and direct links to evidence.
What evidence should teams collect to support SoA entries?
Collect two types of evidence: implementation evidence, such as configuration screenshots, system logs, policy documents, audit or penetration test reports, and training records showing a control is in place, and exclusion evidence, like risk assessment outputs, documented approvals, or third-party assurances or contracts that mitigate the excluded control's risk. Maintain everything in a centralized repository so you can point directly to artifacts when asked.
How should third-party and supply chain controls be handled in the SoA?
First, make a list of all the outside companies that touch the systems or data you've included in your ISMS. For each security requirement in Annex A that relates to how you work with vendors, explain in your SoA how you've covered it, maybe by sending them a security questionnaire, reviewing their audit reports, or writing the right clauses into your contract. Then, anytime you add a new supplier or see big changes with an existing one, go back and update those parts of your SoA to show you've reassessed the risk.
And if a new vendor appears unexpectedly, that triggers an SoA mini-review.
Correct.
How to handle auditor challenges when they question an SoA exclusion.
Be ready to present the underlying risk assessment, the methodology, identified risks, scoring, and why residual risk is acceptable. Show compensating measures, for example, noting that although an on-premises control is out of scope, data is hosted in a provider's certified data center under Contract X. If the auditor deems risk too high, discuss implementing the control or bolstering compensations, then update the SoA promptly.
This is an important question. How do you balance transparency with confidentiality around SoA details?
Publish your certificate and scope statement publicly to build trust. For SoA details, share a sanitized summary, such as a list of control IDs marked applicable or not, while keeping detailed justifications under a controlled access process like NDA-based sharing, documented in your security policy.
Closing question. What emerging trends should we be watching out for in coming years?
Look out for AI-driven risk analytics that proactively suggest control updates, immutable evidence logs, such as blockchain, for enhanced audit trails and evolving standards around AI governance, privacy by design, and supply chain transparency. Prepare SOA processes to absorb these innovations.
Thanks, Mike. In our next call, maybe you can tell us how to go about doing that.
Sure.
And thanks to our audience. Feel free to drop your follow-up questions in the chat or reach out afterward. Have a great rest of your day.